Geek. Talking baseball every week. Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek. Trade Deadline Rehash Edition. I'm John Donos of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Will we have time to review all their moves? It's only an hour and a half long show. We might have to go 2 hours.
We won't be going as deeply into our disappointment about the Twins' lack of moves as we did on Tuesday during the Patreon edition. We did one because neither of us had to write anything.
Yeah. Somebody from the Twins even said we did a Zoom with Derek Falvey, I guess at 5:45. Like 40 minutes after the deadline passed.
Right.
And someone else on the Zoom from the Twins said, well, you guys don't have to write about anything. And I said, well, yeah. Also, this is in some ways a bigger story.
Much bigger story.
And they seemed dumbfounded by that.
This is a much bigger story than if you pick up some random right-handed hitting outfielder. Right.
I'm not sure the extent to which the Twins... I don't want to speak for Falvey himself. Maybe he didn't. I don't know why he would care about the fan reaction necessarily, first and foremost. But the extent to which people are like, no moves is like, that's the story, I guess, as evidenced by the fact that, we did a Patreon 45 or about an hour and a half after, where we just sort of, a lot of ranting. A lot of just
hour and a half of us looking at each other asking why, what,
yeah.
What, all right,
usually one of us comes in with a bug up their ass. Usually it's me, obviously, and the other one, usually you, kind of, I don't want to say talks them down, but at least has some theory about, well, what if you think about it this way, it's not as bad as you think because what about this? And like you said, we both just kind of kept looking at each other going, what the hell? We've been doing this a long time, and I don't think it's by any means on any list of the worst things they've done or anything.
Sure.
But it was one of the more confusing, which is, and we can get right to it. I mean, since last we did this show, they've gotten swept in Kansas City. The trade deadline passed without them doing a single thing.
Right.
Other than a week and a half ago, they traded Jorge Lopez for Dylan Floro, which we talked about on the last episode. And then they take 2 out of 3 from St. Louis, so that's the good news. The other good news is Cleveland continues to lose games.
Yes.
And so the Twins are right now 2.5 up
games,
in the Central, which, maybe that Cleveland actively made itself worse at the deadline.
That's the other good news.
So,
right.
Not necessarily for the future. They're always sort of doing the same thing, which is because of their significantly more limited even than the Twins budget, which right now they have less than half the Twins payroll. The Twins payroll is like 150 something, and theirs is like 75, 70, something like that. Right. And we've seen this before. They did this with Kluber. They did this with Trevor Bauer. They did this with, I'm trying to think of probably some other pitcher that I'm forgetting. But they have an incredible ability to develop starting pitching. And once those starting pitchers get into their 3rd, 4th, 5th year where they're arbitration eligible, they're starting to make a little bit of money, you can start to see free agency on the horizon, and they rarely sign these guys to long-term extensions because of their budgetary issue from ownership. They just kind of look to swap them for future value. And they do it really well, and they do it so that they've been competitive largely for like 20 years, but it's not a surprise. So this version of it was they traded Aaron Savali, who, ERA probably overrates him, but I would say he's certainly a playoff caliber starting pitcher with a couple years of team control left. But they have a new batch of young starting pitchers that they've called up who are doing pretty well. So they traded him for a first base prospect, which they certainly need offensive help future-wise. And then they traded their current designated hitter, Josh Bell, who's actually been hitting pretty well lately. I'm assuming because
they needed to make room for the new guy they brought up.
Well, no, they didn't bring him up yet. But for next year, it's going to be Josh Naylor and this new guy as your first base DH. Right. So they didn't need Josh Bell, and Josh Bell has a player option, I think, for $15 million next year.
Yeah, that's right.
That he was almost surely going to pick up after a mediocre year. So they dumped his contract. They also traded their starting shortstop a few days earlier in Ahmed Rosario, although I probably would make the case that wasn't really making them worse given how poorly he's played. But in general, this is a common thing from Cleveland, which is they assess their current team, and it's mediocre, much like the Twins, and they say, can we add future value to continue our competitive window, to lengthen our competitive window without completely tanking this year's team's chances. And you can argue whether or not they've successfully done that, but from the Twins standpoint, I do wonder at whether this year or in past years or just in general, it's like, do we really need to kind of put pedal to the metal here when the other three teams, Detroit, Kansas City, and Chicago, are clearly just shedding talent and payroll and tanking for the rest of the season? And even the one team that can give us a fight here and has given us sort of a fight here, mostly they've just given each their own selves fights, but is like actively gotten worse. But my argument to that is, you're only up 2 games at the time.
Right.
Like they could actively make themselves worse and stumble to the finish line and still beat you. And then B, if you do beat this Cleveland, this talent shedding Cleveland team, and you win your 83 games and you take this god awful division, don't you want to have a somewhat representative product for a 3-game playoff series that will be at home against a wildcard team? Wouldn't you like, let's say, a right-handed bat in case you have to face a left-handed starting pitcher in one of those 3 games? Or let's say a capable veteran reliever who can get 3 outs in the 7th or 8th inning in one of those games? And so that argument fell a little bit short. But Twins do nothing. And I would say, and I know people are like, well, why would you want them to invest, go all in with this sort of mediocre team? I mean, if you've been listening to us for the last month, that's not that was no means what we were calling for. We, in fact, were saying make the moves on the margins. Just check a couple of boxes.
That's the most puzzling part about it, right? Is that the price to be paid on this was not some enormous thing. It was like they needed to go out and get a number 1 pitcher. They needed to go out and get a huge star right-handed bat. We're just like the 2 things that are always available on the trade market are mediocre hitters and relief pitchers.
Right.
And mediocre
Platoon
relief
bats
pitchers.
and relievers are, I mean, there's always a dozen of them because even the worst teams, the clear selling teams, they got a couple of decent relievers and a bat or 2 that they can move.
And 8 or 9 did move. Yes. And then there was a couple that just didn't move.
Right.
And you're sitting there going, well.
Which Falvey brought up afterward. Like I said, we did a Zoom call with them because they were on the road in St. Louis. Right. It was the off day, but or they were about to play that night. But Falvey was back home, which I kind of get. Like, I joked to him like a week ago.
Oh, yeah.
Are you going to go to St. Louis and try to pull off this Goldschmidt deal in person? But really, I would, given the volume of calls and texts and just information that they need to have on their hands at their fingertips for this, although I guess they didn't really need that, but theoretically, I would want to be in my office too. So we did a Zoom call with him, and one of the things he said a couple of different times, including his very first answer, because Phil Miller, our good friend, said, what happened? Nothing, basically. And Falvey was like, yeah, good question, Phil. And he said,
that is the good question.
Yeah, good, valid question. Yeah. And he said a couple things, but he kept repeating the idea that they were negotiating. He didn't name names or teams, but you can fill in the blanks. They were negotiating with teams that they thought would end up being sellers, but we're kind of on the border of buy, sell, or neutral. And, you can connect the dots to be like the Angels, the Padres, maybe the Cubs, something like that. And ultimately, all of those teams, those 3 teams and maybe a couple others, pulled back and said, we're not going to be selling. And that is accurate. I don't think he's lying about that.
The only real premier players that were traded, I mean, I guess a couple of closers or relievers like Robertson and such, but most of the big names that dominated the trade deadline were starting pitching.
But I don't even mean big names. That's irrelevant. They weren't shopping for big names. I just mean if you thought, Matt Moore would have been a good reliever or Hunter Renfroe would have been a good outfielder, that the fact that the Angels decided a week ago, well, we're not going to trade Ohtani and we're actually going to buy a handful of pieces here. Well, those guys are no longer on the market. That's valid. I mean, I'm sure a handful of guys that they were in talks with ended up getting pulled off the market. We talked about a lot of Cubs and Angels and Padres when we were going through, including like Josh Hader, but also
Bellinger.
Yep. And so, but my question on that is, why were you only negotiating with those teams? Like, you had zeroed in to such an extent that when...
I mean, listen, they certainly had conversations with the Mets about Tommy
right.
Pham.
I don't mean to imply they were literally only...
That's right.
But if you say to me, we were in talks with a few teams and they ended up not being sellers, yeah, okay, that shrinks the pool of available options. But it doesn't eliminate the pool of available options. And so he really didn't imply, I thought... Again, I'm paraphrasing what he said. I could read you some quotes. I transcribed it. But he didn't really position it as we didn't do anything because the prices were exorbitant.
Right.
I mean, I think the agreement league-wide was because the lack of clear-cut selling teams and maybe just for whatever reason the lack of stardom available other than like Verlander and Scherzer, which was a very unique cases, that it was kind of a seller's market that you could get, $1.20 on the dollar. But my point with the type of lower wattage boxes that the Twins should have, and I think we're trying to check, which is even if you pay $1.20 on the dollar for a seventh inning reliever or a right-handed platoon corner outfielder, that still is not top prospects. And so that's the part that I think was confusing. We joked on the Patreon. I compared it to Al Capone's vault. Yes. That they opened it up and there was literally nothing there. It just didn't occur to me. We weren't expecting much.
No,
but it really,
we weren't expecting a big move. Right?
It really did not occur to me that nothing, truly nothing, was a possibility because I just thought, why would you not just do something? Right. I mean, I think it's very, especially, within moments of the deadline passing, and it was at 5:00, and then they played. I think it's 6:45 against St. Louis. So it kind of blurred into the normal pregame news cycle where you're meeting with the manager and you're getting the lineup posted and all that. And so they announced in tandem, Brock Stewart has suffered a setback in his recovery from an elbow injury, which has already taken about a month longer than they were expecting. Right. And so he's a huge question mark to pitch at all this season, which that impacts your need for a reliever, certainly. Right. And then they also announced Alex Kirilloff was going to be out longer than the 10-day minimum and would need a cortisone shot, I think, in his shoulder and all that stuff. And so that affects not your right-handed bat search, but just your overall strength of your lineup. And so that made it even more baffling to me because, I mean, this didn't they didn't wake up on Tuesday morning and find out about – I mean, they've known Brock Stewart has been trending in the wrong direction here. Yeah, right. And so then it's like you made no trades – and you're not even sitting there expecting Brock Stewart back. Like, at least that premise I could kind of feel, which is, well, we didn't make a trade for a reliever other than Floro because we're expecting Theobar and Stewart back. Well, now you're not even expecting Stewart back. And so, I don't know, it seemed almost like they just didn't think it was worth bothering. Like, why bother? Which, man, that is a strange tack to take.
When you're up one game in the AL Central at the time. Right.
And also, why bother? You haven't won a playoff game in 20 years. That you need to do that. Because as we've talked about, that looms over everything. Right. There isn't a single thing the Twins can do that
during the regular season.
Certainly during the regular season. Or even during the offseason, unfortunately. Right. Nothing. They sign a player people have been begging them for. Or they make a trade that everyone agrees is good, or they have a 5-game winning streak, or other, whatever, hypotheticals mostly. And it's like there's always a certain segment of the fan base is like, yeah, well, they haven't won a playoff game in 20 years. Right. And I don't know that that's like fair, but that's reality. And and so
I'm not sure it's unfair.
Right, that's what I mean. It's like, is that a stupid criticism to constantly bring up for everything? Probably, but it is a yes. And here's the other thing.
It does. You can understand why it dampens the rest of the regular season. Why the rest of the regular season doesn't mean a lot. Right. Why it's more trouble selling tickets and such. Getting people to show up.
Whether it's a smart criticism or a dumb criticism, if that's how your fan base feels, that's the reality that you find yourself in from a team perspective. And so my thing is like, if you think you can sleepwalk to this division title, you may very well be right. Right. Cleveland may just not even put up a fight, and you can maybe win this thing with 83 wins.
The day after the trade deadline, I took a look. Baseball Reference had the Twins at 76% chance of making the postseason. Fangraphs had them at 80% chance.
So you might just be able to coast to this thing and limp across the finish line and all that. But why not just add a little something, if only for the potential playoff matchup?
Yeah.
And, we said the same type of stuff last year, by the way. This division has not been good for 25 years, essentially. But last year, similar story, which is the Twins led this division for most of last year. Yeah. And they did make moves at the trade deadline. Those moves went very, very badly for them. They were, uncharacteristically aggressive moves for more expensive player types, which is a frontline starter, a closer, reliever, and all that stuff. And those were awful moves. Maybe they were scared away.
Maybe they were
doing that. But my thing is, you don't need to even put yourself at risk for those type of bad moves because you're not trading any of your top 10 prospects by any means for
a relief pitcher, right? Yeah, for a sixth inning guy, relief pitcher.
I mean, we saw what those generally cost with Michael Fulmer last year. It was Sawyer Gibson Long. It was like their number 25 prospect or something like that. Yeah. And so,
we saw. I mean, it was similar for right-handed hitting outfielders.
Right.
The prospects that were given, the ones that were moved, right? What teams got back in return was not a top 10 prospect.
No,
it was It was a guy they like who's somewhere in the 15 to 30 range.
And the other thing that I think we both kind of felt was especially frustrating about the lack of action at the deadline was both of these areas of weakness, right-handed outfield bat and just kind of overall relief depth or bullpen help, however you want to phrase that, have been clear weak spots for them since day one of the offseason in November. Right. They were on every list.
Sure.
We talked about them as these are the needs. They needed to find a shortstop. They needed to find a catcher. They needed whatever. Right. There was one other thing. And then, these two. And they went completely unaddressed during the offseason. They didn't spend 1 cent on a major league relief pitcher during the offseason. And they added no right-handed hitter who could play the outfield to the point that we were like, are they just going to run back Kyle Garlick in that role? It turns out they didn't even use Kyle Garlick, basically. They've gone without that role in general. And so if you're not going to fill it during the offseason, and then you're not going to fill it at the trade deadline because you say the options weren't there for you, you're just not going to fill it? There's just going to be you're going to have the worst lineup in baseball against left-handed pitching, and you're just going to trot that out there?
All season we're talking about how, these things need to be addressed, but they'll have to be addressed closer to the trade deadline.
Right.
Because nobody makes trades during the season in April, May, June, etc. And then with the wild card, it's not even early July. It's not even the first 3 weeks of July. All of this thing is going to what's going to happen is we're going to get to the last 72 hours, and half a dozen of these guys, or a dozen of each of them is going to be traded. And
that is what happened.
That is what happened.
It just didn't happen with the Twins. Right? It went on without the Twins' involvement.
I think I read that 29 teams either traded for or traded away a prospect at the trade deadline. The only team that didn't was the Twins, because the Twins did make one trade.
Right, Lopez for Floro.
Right.
And so that's what I don't get. I mean, I'm sure they'll tell you that they have confidence in their internal bullpen options, but I would say that confidence is in guys like Emilio Pagan or Jordan Balazovic, who I guess I personally don't have a great deal of confidence in. Let's just put it that way. And my other point there was, what harm does it do to just add a little bit of insurance there?
Sure, yeah, right.
Even from an injury standpoint.
Right.
I mean, what happens if Griffin Jacks goes down here or Pagan goes down, and then you're just, Balzovic's pitching the 7th inning in a playoff game?
Right.
Like, that's not something.
It's fine when Sonny Gray goes 7 and you can just go Jacks to Durant. That's perfect. But
we know
that doesn't happen in the playoffs.
Right.
Sonny Gray isn't lasting 7
in the playoffs.
That's right. So.
And then, let's see, there was a couple other things. The other thing that Falvey said that I thought really struck me as not credible, at least from where I sit, was, he kind of said, well, everyone wants us to bring in guys to fill these roles, but anyone you bring in bumps somebody from the 26-man roster. And he said that a couple of times. And I'm sitting there thinking, are we watching the same team? Like, what? First of all, in the bullpen,
right.
2 days earlier, they had sent Cole Sands down to the minor leagues after he went 7 consecutive days taking up a spot on the 26-man roster without appearing in a game. Right. And they've used the last couple of bullpen spots as musical chairs forever.
Right.
I mean, Josh Winder comes up, Brent Hedrick comes up. The idea that, you've had Oliver Tega come up and down, like right, yeah. The idea that, we couldn't have added a reliever because where would we have put them in the bullpen? Yeah, boot somebody out. Like what you've been doing that all year. And then especially on the offensive side, Now, it's a little bit less obvious because, unfortunately, now Alex Kirilloff is hurt too,
Yes.
which potentially, I think, saved Joey Gallo from getting DFA'd.
I think so too.
But now...
Well, if they would have actually acquired somebody.
Right, that's what I mean.
Right.
But now they're like, well, we need Gallo as the left-handed part of a first base platoon with Donovan Solano, which I suppose is technically true. But I might just say, why not just hit Donovan Solano against righties? Right. Joey Gallo has hit 160 in his last 75 games. You're telling me, well, we couldn't add a good right-handed bat that would actually, from a utility standpoint, start 2-3 times a week in a role where we have no, because who can we kick off the 26-man roster? Joey Gallo. You can kick Joey Gallo off the 26-man roster, except they are the ones who brought in Joey Gallo and paid him $11 million when there was no real need for him. They had a logjam of left-handed hitting outfielders anyway. And so
we started talking in June about how the clock was ticking on some players' performance. And
turns out no.
By the end of July, that clock would certainly reach midnight.
You'd think.
No.
A lot of the stuff we assume or we think seems logical from a linear thinking standpoint. Like, okay, they took a 1-year, $11 million flyer on Joey Gallo, who's coming off a horrendous season where he hit 160. Well, surely if he looks cooked after 3 months, they'll move on from him. Right. He looks
especially
cooked.
if they've got, say a left-handed bat that they could replace him with a
yes.
can throw the ball 98 miles per hour.
Yeah, is it starting to become clear why I wouldn't shut up about Matt Wallner getting an opportunity here?
Right.
I mean, I'm not going to tell you he's headed for the Twins Hall of Fame or anything, but the guy can hit.
Right.
We're starting to see that now. You can wonder, did he really need to play 150 games at AAA? Was that something that the Twins needed to do? Did they need to invest $11 million in Joey Gallo in the first place?
Given the success he's having, they played it exactly right.
Oh, brilliant. They should wait another 3 years. Think how ready he'll be 3 years from now. Let's see, just to wrap up the trade deadline stuff. Yeah, if you want, an hour and a half of these last 10 minutes. I don't. That's not a great sell, I realize, but we was very I don't know,
cathartic.
Sure, we opened up a vein. Let's see. There was one other. Kept saying, oh, well, and then just the last thing is, and this has become sort of a mantra from Baldelli, from Falvey, from other front office, from players themselves, which is, he said, which is something anyone will say after failing to make a single trade. We believe in the guys in that clubhouse, and they have to step up. And the point you made on the Patreon is, yeah, sure, true. No right-handed bat they bring in is going to be more impactful than Byron Buxton and Carlos Correa hitting to their, track records.
Right.
But your point, which I think is a good one, and listeners know I rarely tell Johnny makes a good point, was at what point does the front office have to look in that same mirror and
step things up?
Say, we didn't do a damn thing.
Right.
Like, we're just sitting here. And by the way, who assembled the group in that clubhouse that is underperforming offensively? You signed Correa, you signed Gallo, you signed Christian Vasquez, you kept Kepler, and on and on and on and on. You signed Buxton to an extension. And so clearly they're just banking on what they thought of this team heading into the season being more correct over the last 2 months than what we've seen from this team during the season.
Right.
And, you can argue about small sample size and projections and kind of true talent levels and how much should you how much should you continue to believe in Carlos Correa being, let's say, an 850 OPS guy for the final 2 months, because that's what he's been for his career, when he's been a 675 OPS guy for the first 4 months or whatever, and has really, and same thing with Buxton, same thing with Polanco, and on and on. Gallo, how much are you banking on what Joey Gallo did 4 years ago for the Texas Rangers,
or in April?
For 3 weeks in April.
That's right,
And I kind of fundamentally disagree with that. Not because I think banking on people, kind of performing to their track records is wrong. I do think that's a decent way to look at things, but I think 4 months is a significant part of that track record. And in fact, if you reran Carlos Correa's projections from this point forward, having folded in the last 4.5 months, it's going to be a significantly worse projection. Same thing with Buxton, same thing with Vasquez, same thing with all these guys.
And your situation is now that you are a game up on another team. You are in a divisional race right here.
And anything can happen at that point.
The fact that that most of the division is kind of crummy is fine. You're one of those teams. You still have to find some way to separate yourself.
Right. It's been crummy, by the way, and you're still only a game up.
Right.
Now they're 2 games up.
Yeah,
but
there's 60 games left, and you've got a 1-game lead You might want to do something.
I guess
right.
my point on that is, and I agree, you want to reduce variance if you're the team that should win.
Right. Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if you have aces and you're playing poker, you want to go one-on-one with somebody. You don't want to go all in against the entire table. Because one-on-one, aces are like an 80% against any other, even kings.
Right.
But if 8 people go all in, yes, aces will win more than their equal share of that pot. But you can lose to 7 deuce if everyone just goes all in. And so, yes, you're slightly winning this god-awful division.
Right.
But you haven't been able to separate yourselves in 4 months. Why do you assume you're going to be able to separate yourselves in 2 months? Right. And even if you are assuming, look, ultimately we're just a better team, we're just going to separate ourselves from Cleveland, which I do think is probably going to happen. Why not add a little bit on inexpensively just to reduce your variance? To instead of thinking we're 2 games better than Cleveland for the next 2 months, maybe add a piece or two, and maybe you're 2.5 games better than Cleveland over the.
We weren't advocating trading away Sonny Gray for a big bat. Let's take a risk here and see what's going on. The Twins don't have to take risks, but that was the whole point. Is the way to even reduce that risk even more is to just go out and get a couple of supplementary pieces for some low-level prospects.
Yes.
And they just didn't do
it. And I'm hoping maybe to talk about, be at the ballpark today because they've been on the road, obviously, maybe get a little more insight from what their thinking was. Not that it'll, talk me out of what my opinion is on it, but I do like to at least, hear sometimes what is said publicly.
Right, sure.
And especially publicly in the moment is, not necessarily representative of the actual thinking that led them to that place. Sure. Sometimes it is, and
it might be that they reflected on it a little bit now too. And
so I'm kind of curious about that. So that's the trade deadline in action. Those are a lot of words about a lot of nothing. But like we said, sometimes the absence of a story is in fact a bigger story, and I do think that's the case with the Twins. And then I wrote this. And like I say, it's a juicy one when it says Gleeman in the headline. Because all that is code for please don't blame Dan Hayes for this. Truly. And I wrote that the lack of trade deadline moves from the Twins leaves no room at this point for the front office to hide.
Right. Yes.
This is them signaling in the strongest possible terms that you can signal at a trade deadline. We believe we're the best team in this division. We believe we don't really even have to supplement or reinforce this roster to win this division. And we're sticking with, I would argue stubbornly, but we're sticking with the offseason approach that led to this mediocre, lopsided roster. And like you said, they're 80% to win this division. Right. Odds are they're going to be right. It is going to be enough to win this division. But all I think is that 20% where they're wrong, I don't want to be in their shoes if they're wrong.
No,
because you've left yourself no excuse at this point.
Yep.
You've essentially said, we don't have to try. We will just win this division, which is fine if you're right.
Yeah.
But you better be right. Because if you lose
now
this
there's
division,
a clear narrative blaming the front office for sitting on their hands.
And I think rightfully. And if you lose this division that is being handed to you on a silver platter, I mean, just truly, it is one of the worst divisions I've ever seen. That your only competition has been below 500 all year and just traded away 3 key veteran players. If you cannot do this and you blow a lead to Cleveland in the division for a second straight year and you miss the playoffs for a third straight year, what conclusion are fans or media members or handsome podcasters supposed to take from that or make from that other than, boy, they were wrong. They're just wrong on wrong on wrong. And they're going to just go down with the Joey Gallo ship and the Max Kepler ship. And now Pagan is their, secondary setup man again and all this stuff. Maybe they'll be right. Maybe they'll win playoff games with this group. And you can say, they didn't need to do a single thing at the deadline. They were right. But man, if they're not right. Okay. Before we get to a lot of stuff, Joe Ryan, Dallas Keuchel, and some other news and notes.
We've got football season also. Trade deadline season is passed, and football season is beginning. Training camp has started. All the people at KFAN are also excited right now. You can just it's
I like it. I like it mostly because the press box becomes much less crowded because many of the people who stop by at Twins games are now at Vikings practice.
And since it's fantasy football draft season, we just got to remind you, our friends at RotoWire, we talk about RotoWire twice a year. We talk about it before baseball season, and we talk about it for football season. Right. And I signed up for it originally because of baseball. I like it as a research thing for
Right.
baseball, right?
It's also what I
But
use.
it is invaluable for my 25-year football league that I do with my high school friends. It has absolutely been invaluable, and you can basically take full advantage of it free.
Yeah, it's a free trial. And here's what I always say about RotoWire. Here's how you know it's a actual free trial.
Right.
They don't even ask you your credit card information.
That's
for it. You go to rotowire.com /Gleeman. You get a free trial for Gleeman and the Geek listeners. And you can, by the way, if you want to use that free trial and draft 400 fantasy teams with
Right.
it,
Yes.
and use the cheat sheets and use the rankings and use all their player news information, which is invaluable,
Yep.
go for it, because their point is you will find our service and our website and our information so valuable to you that you'll want to stick around after.
Yeah,
the
you'll
draft.
find it help not only during the draft, it also helps you throughout the season. Like, oh, here's the waiver wire pickups that you want to be like every Wednesday. Here's the waiver wire pickups.
RotoWire.com /Gleeman to get your free trial.
That's great.
And then also
Soda
talk
Stick.
about Soda Stick, longtime sponsor of ours.
They're also getting excited about football season. They just reordered and restocked their Keuchel Chains T-shirts, which is I saw a video of Kirk signing some kid's Keuchel Chains T-shirt the other day, which was fun to watch because, like I said, they're back at spring training camp and things are fun. They've also got the Minnesota Patch Hat collection coming this week. I mean, you just go out to sodastick.com and you take a look and you find 10 new designs.
Yes, it's soda, like Minnesota, sodastickco.com, or just Google SodaStick. And if you use the promo code Gleeman, 15% off whatever your order is. Promo code Gleeman, 15% off at SodaStick.
Small batch, clever stuff. Stuff you're going to like to wear at a Twins game during this pennant race, and stuff that you're going to like wearing to Vikings games or tailgates.
Okay, so while taking 2 out of 3 from St. Louis, they announced, so the game they lost, Joe Ryan once again gave up a billion home runs.
Wow. I just can't believe how many home runs he has given up since that complete game shutout.
Here's the numbers. I have them. It is startling. So he threw the shutout, which was their first shutout in
3-4 years, something like
no,
2018?
over 5 years.
2018? Yeah.
Yeah, it was like 2,000 days almost, something like that. And then he threw, 110 pitches or something like that. Yeah. And then since then, he's made 7 starts. He has an 8.63 ERA. By the way, at the time when he threw the shutout, he had like a 2.90 ERA or maybe low 3 ERA, something like that. I mean, people were talking about him legitimately as an all-star.
Sure, right.
In the 7 starts since then, he has an 8.63 ERA, and here's the, like you said, just the startling part, which is he's thrown 32 innings, and he's allowed 17 home runs. So that's more than a home run every other inning. Yeah, for 7 starts.
That's a home run in every under 2 innings, right? Yeah. Before that, he had done, I think, 8 home runs in 99 innings, or something like that. Like, so he was at 1 home run per 12 innings, and he's gone down to 1 home run per 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here to tell you, you can't live in the major leagues allowing a home run every other inning. You just can't. Within that, he got a lot of strikeouts.
Yes,
and the velocity was still okay, but clearly there was something wrong, and a couple of those real clunker starts were at Target Field, so I was in the room when he did his post-game interviews, and he was asked, like, is everything right physically? Like, do you feel like you're tipping pitches? Is there something you can point to here that why you're giving up 4 home runs every game? And he really downplayed it to the extent that I was like, well, is he just saying he's bad now? Like, what,
right,
It's, and it turns out he had been hiding an injury for literally that entire 7-start stretch. He tweaked his hamstring while warming up before the Atlanta start, which is when he gave up 5 home runs in the first 2 innings. Mm-hmm. Pitched through, didn't tell anyone that I just hurt my hamstring warming up, which, okay, that happens. You give up 5 home runs. Now, to me, if I just injured myself before a game and I gave up 5 home runs, there should be, bells going off that are saying that probably related. You know what I mean? He didn't tell anyone anything, and then went on to have the worst. I looked up this stat. I was like, well, what's the most home runs a Twins pitcher has ever allowed over 7 starts? The record had been held, fittingly, I would say, by Bert Blyleven twice in both 86 and 87. He did it. Okay. 2 different 7-start stretches. And Carlos Silva.
They both gave up that many home runs?
15
15. Okay, gotcha.
So
okay.
Joe Ryan went and shattered that. He gave up 17.
Nicely done.
And so it took him until this last start, which was another ugly one. And I'm sure at some point, particularly because the timing of it matched up with Dallas Keuchel opting out of his AAA deal, which meant the Twins had 48 hours. It made me sad because we've been laying out the terms of this Dallas Keuchel thing for several weeks and saying, he can opt out and then the Twins have 48 hours to decide and all this. And yet I got so many replies from people on Twitter and in comment sections going, they just lost Dallas Keuchel. What are they going to do? And I was like, they got the 48 hours.
Yeah,
that's
right.
That's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
And so he finally told them, hey, I've been pitching through a hamstring injury that hasn't gotten better.
Right.
And we talk about this all the time, going back to, I remember the Nick Punto days.
He might very well have also said, I've got the All-Star break coming up. That was only 2-3 starts away. Get an extra rest.
Sure, but that's been weeks since then.
Yeah.
I just, when you're struggling to that extent and you're hiding an injury from them.
Yes.
It doesn't click to say, man, these two are related. And I go back to there was a year when we were young bloggers where Nick Punto had taken over an everyday role and he hit like 130 in the second half,
right?
Or down the stretch, like just even by his low offensive standards, like just awful. But of course, Gardner continued to play him every day and all this stuff. And then the moment the season ended, he went for hamstring surgery or something like that, or groin surgery or whatever it was. And everyone was like, oh yeah, he's been playing hurt for 3 months now. We all knew that. And it was like, what good did that do anybody?
Right.
And one thing we talk about quite a bit is when you see a good player, not just struggle, not just a 300 hitter hit 220 for a month or
not
two.
One of the natural dips that can happen.
There are ebbs and flows of the season and there's randomness and guys have bad years and all that stuff. But when a guy goes from, Joe Ryan for 2 years has been a, low 3 ERA guy, like you said, had actually made quite a bit of improvement in terms of allowing home runs, was looking like an all-star, and then he just goes through one of the worst stretches of any pitcher in the history of the team. Most of the time, that whether someone wants to admit it in the moment or it leaks out afterward, or sometimes no one ever knows, that's due to an injury, whether hitter, pitcher, whatever. And it's like, that's happened. So Trevor Larnach, it happened 2 years where it's like
Kirilloff.
What happened to? Well, yeah, but that was they knew he was hurt. But I'm saying a hidden injury.
Oh, I see. I got you.
Or at least one that's not being made public, and in this case, wasn't even made to the manager and the team. Which to me, I would be furious about. That's on the training staff and Baldelli for not, creating an environment where players feel like they need to come forward with that type of thing.
I mean, that culture extends long before Baldelli, and so that's a difficult culture change to me.
But that's
especially in this organization.
Part of the point.
Yeah, right.
Right? You're supposed to establish that because otherwise, what are you supposed to guess when guys are hurt? New trainer and all that, and they're just going, we didn't know anything about it. Well, okay, that's on Joe Ryan. Do not get me wrong.
That's right.
But, but I mean, I would be furious with that because it's not tennis. It's not a one-on-one sport. You want to try to play through a hamstring injury and suck for a year as a tennis player or a golf player, whatever it is. Go for it. You're only hurting yourself. And in this case, he hurt himself because now his season totals are garbage.
Right.
But within that, you hurt a team. And it's strange to me that it took this long for someone to say, what is wrong? What is happening? Because this is so far beyond, like I said, just a bad patch for a good player. I mean, this is a fundamentally different performance than ever before from this player, to the extent that he's unplayably bad, obviously. And I don't. They're fortunate in the sense that. So I looked it up. They went 3 and 4
over
in those starts.
Games,
so at most, maybe he cost them a win.
Yeah,
I guess 2. You could argue. You'd have to go back and look how they hit in those starts. But the problem with even doing that is how they. A couple of those games, like the Atlanta game, they were down 6-0 in the first inning.
Right.
That's just an automatic loss that he's handed you. You don't know how that game plays out if someone else takes the start. So I don't know. It's to me, it's everyone in the abstract, and this is part of sports culture for since the birth of sports, loves to act like being a tough guy and playing through pain is this admirable trait. And it is to some extent. Like on a 10,000-foot view, just you want an athlete to want to push through things and to want to help the team. But I think the wires get crossed there in that it needs to be made clear that this is not helping the team. You think you're helping the team. Joe Ryan undoubtedly thought, at least at the beginning of this thing, 7 starts ago, when he took the mound in Atlanta and just thought, I hurt my hamstring a little bit. They need me to start. I can't scratch from the start. I got to go.
We're going to go do a bullpen game right now. And
Right. You no doubt think you're helping the team. And there is some truth to that. But it needs to be made clear on an individual level or a team level that we don't think this type of behavior is helping the team.
Right.
Now, there's a fine line. You don't want guys just coming in and say, I got a hangnail today. I think it'd be better if I didn't play.
Right.
There needs to be some of that. But I think in baseball especially, you play 162 times. Like, you can miss a few, even if you're a starting pitcher. It's not the NFL where every week is a mini Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like, and so the fact that that's not made clear, and look, Joe Ryan is a strong personality. I'm not saying that it's Rocco Baldelli's fault or the trainer's fault that they couldn't get this message through to him. I think that's probably a pretty tough nut to crack. Joe Ryan's got his own opinions, and he's got his own way of being, and he's a very interesting guy in that regard. But I guess if you would have told me someone on this team thought they could cure their own injury without telling anybody, he might be at the top of my list for the guess. Yep, and I would have been right on that. And so, hopefully this is just a 2 or 3 week thing. He's out a minimum of 15 days, which is basically 2 or 3 starts. The question will be, did that heal enough? And by the way, if it didn't, if 15 days from now he's still unable because of the hamstring injury, then this was even worse than I'm making it out to be, because that means he had a real hamstring injury, or it means he had a minor hamstring injury that made worse by pitching through it. Because that's the other thing. It's like there are some injuries that you can play through, and there's been cases where a player will say, this is screwed up, but the doctor told me it won't get worse. Like it is what it is. We got to get it fixed in the offseason. So do you either want to play through it now or not? But a hamstring injury is the opposite of that. A hamstring injury is one of those that it can start as nothing, and if you don't address it or take time off, it can become massive. Like it can become way, way worse. So that that's part of the factor too. And then Baldelli said afterward, and I also saw people were like, well, is this just an excuse? They're going to, he's been struggling, which, obviously. Yes. We're going to shut him down for 15 days, and that gives us kind of a loophole here to bring in Dallas Keuchel.
Right.
2 things I would say that make that, at least to me, clear that that's not the case here. One is, I don't think they felt like moving mountains to get Dallas Keuchel to the majors was worthwhile.
And I think that's probably
I think the rest of the league felt that way, too. I mean, we're going to find out. He's going to start one of the games this weekend, it sounds like.
He's not listed as one of the probable pitchers this weekend, so it looks like he'll be in Detroit.
Okay. But, I mean, he's going to start on this upcoming. And we're going to find out, how does 88-mile-an-hour sinkers play in the majors? How does a pretty ERA but bad peripheral numbers at AAA, translate to the majors? We're going to find out.
Yep.
But I don't think the Twins were sitting there going, how can we get Dallas Keuchel on this team?
Yeah.
And then beyond that, the comments from Baldelli about Joe Ryan hiding the injury made it very clear that this is real. That this was not just some scheme they came to.
Baldelli was not amused.
He was not amused. And even Joe Ryan's comments afterward made it clear that this was a real thing. Because Joe Ryan would have just brushed it off otherwise. Would have wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, they told me they're shutting me down for 15 days or whatever. Which we've seen before. They did that with Michael Pineda. I remember when Michael Pineda was interviewed about it, he was like, I guess this will get way better in 10 days or something. So that's what we're going to do. And I was like, okay. But Baldelli said, he certainly didn't throw Joe Ryan under the bus, but he basically said this is not something that can go on. The communication here has to be better. And he wasn't just singling out Joe Ryan. He was, I think, saying himself, Nick Paparesta, the team trainer and stuff, because the reason you have a manager and the reason you have a training staff and the reason you have, this and that is so that the players just play. That they're not the ones responsible for making these big picture decisions. But you need to at least extract quality information from them on how they're feeling, because Joe Ryan is the expert on his own hamstring, and if you can't get him to willingly,
if he's actively hiding something, it's a lot trickier to figure it out.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, right.
And so just to be clear, Joe Ryan deserves the blame for that, but I also just think I hope it's a kind of a wake up call maybe to Baldelli and the training staff.
Or maybe to the players and the culture on the team.
Sure.
Like, hey, we went too far here.
You're not helping anything, and that has just happened so many times to so many players under so many different managers and front offices and stuff like that, where it's like you get to the end of this thing where this guy has been horrible for X amount of time, and then you go, oh yeah, he's been playing hurt, and you just want to go, I just want to scream. I just want to go, who did that help?
Right.
What was the goal here? What was the and I guess now we can switch gears here a little and talk about Dallas Keuchel.
But first, let's cover our last two sponsors. First sponsor is BetterHelp. Maybe you're hiding something. Maybe you're hiding something.
That's some say.
That's not a bad segue. Maybe you're hiding something, or maybe you're at the point where you feel it's time to address something, whether it's, to see a therapist about whatever. Maybe it's something you're personally wrestling with. Maybe it's something that you're wrestling with your spouse. And it's time to talk to somebody. And then you go, okay, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to invest myself and figure this out. And then you run into a brick wall because you're like, hold it, who am I talking to?
The barriers for entry for finding a therapist, at least initially, can be extreme and can push you off the track of wanting to get the help, which is where BetterHelp comes in. Super easy. Within 48 or 72 hours, they can get you with a licensed therapist, and they can tailor it to however you want to do it. You want to just do a video call with somebody? They can do that. You don't even want to be on camera? You can do a phone call. If you're a weirdo like me and you hate talking on the phone, you can just do a text live chat with them. They can figure out whatever it is and tailor it to you. They can get it done in a timely manner, and they can, actually start to help you with whatever you think you need help on. And our listeners can get 10% off their first month and let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Here's how you do it. You go to betterhelp.com/Gleeman today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman.
And finally, Game Time. Game Time is a little bit different than some of the other ways you may have bought tickets. It's an app. So you go and download the Game Time app, and then you set up an account and you use the promo code Gleeman. You're going to get $20 off. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end here. But I'm planning on using Game Time because I'm going to be trucking. I mean, first of all, I've used it here at Target Field. I use it all the time at Target Field. On my way to the game at Brixworth and the patio.
Their specialty is hard to find tickets, like for concerts and stuff like that, but last minute tickets too. Right. And so John puts it to the test. Fantastic. As he's strolling to Target Field.
Exactly right.
He picks it up.
It could not be easier. It's easier than walking into the front box office and standing in line to get a ticket.
That's definitely true. Yeah, as someone who's attempted to do that.
Yeah, and now I'm going to be going to Detroit to watch the Twins. I'm going to be going to Philly to watch the Twins. I don't want to screw around with tickets, trying to get tickets to those places. I'm just going to use the Game Time app.
And
so plus, I'm going to get $20 off.
So if you snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, and then just use the code Gleeman for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account on the Game Time app, redeem the code Gleeman for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, so Joe Ryan creates an opening for Dallas Keuchel. I'm not entirely sure what I think would have happened if Joe Ryan weren't going on the IL. I don't get the sense that they were
considering a six-man.
I really don't. I just, maybe they were just considering demoting Joe Ryan or a phantom injury or whatever to make this happen. I mean, this has been a long time coming just in terms of Joe Ryan's performance being bad. But I think it's very easy for fans to look at a 1.13 ERA from Dallas Keuchel with the Saints, and he just won International League Pitcher of the Month, and say, well, he's back, baby. 1.13 ERA. Right. That's like Bob Gibson, man. Like, even if that triples in the majors, he's in great shape.
Right.
But within that, I think I wrote down the numbers here, but the numbers are, ERA is the last thing I would look at when trying to evaluate a 35-year-old pitcher at AAA, especially in a small sample. But he made 6 AAA starts. He threw 32 innings.
Yeah, 32 innings.
28 strikeouts in 32 innings, which is not great, but it's not horrible. 12 walks within that.
That's not bad either.
I mean, a 28 to 12 strikeout to walk ratio in 32 innings is significantly worse than an average pitcher at AAA at this point. But you got to remember, pitchers are averaging a strikeout. So a former Cy Young winner at AAA should be doing that. But I'm not saying he pitched poorly by any means. Obviously, he pitched well. But the idea of look at the guy's ERA,
that's not representative of a 1.13 ERA.
Yeah, what you're looking at. I'm sure it's closer to, I don't know, high threes, low fours, or something like that. If you were to just kind of normalize it, but to give him a look, I have no problem with that, particularly given the Joe Ryan situation. I think there's certainly an argument to have been made to just call up Louis Varland, who has a much brighter future, has much better raw stuff, and while he faltered at the end of his run with the Twins, a month or two ago, looked pretty good, not only late last year, but early on this year filling in.
Similar home run problems to Joe Ryan. Not nearly as bad, but it was home runs that were doing him in.
But he's certainly proven, I would argue, to be a competent major league pitcher. He's 25. He's got a bright future. I think he's going to be in the rotation next year full time, most likely. And so I just wonder, is it even worth messing with Dallas Keuchel when you have Louis Varland? Now, I'm sure they will tell you, because they're obsessed with depth, well, by using Dallas Keuchel here, we also still have Louis Varland. If we had ditched Dallas Keuchel and called up Louis Varland, and then Louis Varland got knocked around or got hurt, well, then who's next on the line? So now they maintain...
And that might still happen, just so we're clear. Right? Yeah.
I just wonder, how long of a leash does Dallas Keuchel get? And maybe it's a moot point because he goes out there and he throws, 6 innings of 1-run ball and he gets 1 million ground balls and the strikeouts don't matter, and he's back to being at least a competent, veteran starter, which would be huge for them. Right. Given that he'll at minimum, somebody's going to make 2 or 3 starts at minimum in place of Joe Ryan, and it's going to be in August of a pennant race. So that's huge. But I'm skeptical, and I know I expressed similar thoughts with Maeda, but I was much more skeptical even of Keuchel than Maeda, because Maeda, we were talking about his velocity and it was being only 91. Now we're talking about a guy his velocity being only 87, 88. And I know people are like, well, Dallas Keuchel never threw hard. Right. We sure threw a hell of a lot harder than 87, 88. He was 91.
Right.
There's a very fine line there. And I think each kind of mile per hour you dip below 92, 93 miles an hour, the degree of difficulty ramps up significantly. And so, he's always been a pitcher who walked the fine line, even when he was winning a Cy Young Award with the Astros and making all-star teams. And he had a great season in 2020 with the White Sox, even the abbreviated season. He was a guy who no one could quite figure out. It wasn't obvious why this guy is so good.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, you break it down and it's like, well, he never gives up homers because everything's on the ground. He gets tons of double plays because it's just all ground balls. No one ever steals bases on him because he's got a great pickoff move. Right. There's these little things that you can do, but it's like during his Cy Young season, I watched him a lot there. I mean, he was for playoff games and stuff, and you watch him and you go, this dude's just throwing 91-mile-an-hour sinkers on the edges of the plate, and that's nobody can figure anything out. Well, yeah, that's a recipe that works. Right. I just wonder, does it work 5 years later? Throwing 87 miles an hour, and we'll see. I mean, I don't think it's impossible that he could, Dylan Bundy-esque give him 5 and fly a couple of times through rotation, which would be really valuable, and that's why you like veterans, because there is that possibility. But
I think Varland could do that though too.
Right?
I mean, just
sure. And so you're going to see Dallas Keuchel, which is interesting. I mean, it's a big name. The Twins have certainly faced him plenty over the years. They finally have that lefty in their rotation that we've gotten a trillion mailbag questions about.
It will be interesting to see how lefty fares at Target Field with the ball flying out to left field.
Well, I'll tell you this. If he's giving up homers, he's screwed.
Yeah, that's a problem.
I mean, that's been...
I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons why they're starting him in Detroit as opposed to
But I just mean
Field.
The only thing Dallas Keuchel can kind of be counted on to do late in his career was not give up a bunch of homers.
Right, yeah.
He can no longer be counted on missing bats. He can no longer be counted on going deep in starts. But if he starts giving up homers, well, that degree of difficulty is it's off the charts at that point. So you're going to see him. I don't know. I'm curious, like I said, to see. Does he basically go on a start-by-start basis? If he has a decent first start, he gets a good second start? Or are we just kind of saying, you're here till Ryan comes back?
I think sounds like that. I mean, it sounds like that would be the way. I would think they would give him more than one time through the order.
Well, it depends. We'll see.
We will have to see what that one time looks like.
If he throws a no-hitter, yeah. If he doesn't make it out of the first inning, nah, probably not. That's where the rotation is. I mean, it's funny how things can change pretty quickly. It's like 2 months ago, it was
literally 5 days ago. We had to address the question of whether or not they might trade away Sonny Gray or Kenta Maeda.
I just mean, 2 months ago, it was Sonny Gray's been phenomenal.
Right.
And Joe Ryan's a borderline all-star, and then Pablo Lopez was an actual all-star, but we have big questions about Kenta Maeda. And now Kenta Maeda is one of their best starters right now.
Right, yes.
Joe Ryan is a mess completely and is out of the picture now. Sonny Gray's gotten back on track the last couple of times, I think, by essentially just saying, and he said this after his last start, and we saw it yesterday too, I'm just going to throw strikes. I'm sick of this stuff. Like, if they're going to knock me around, they're going to knock me around. I'm going to trust my stuff. And I think he was getting – we talked about this. He's a little bit of a control freak, I would say, and he was getting so –
maybe trying to be a little too fine.
So insistent on pitching himself out of these jams perfectly. Like, bases loaded, I got to get 2 strikeouts here. And then he would just walk a guy with the bases loaded, and it would get even worse. And 2 starts ago afterward, he said, because he hates walking people, which is interesting because he does walk a fair number of people. Yeah, right. And he just said, I'm sick of doing this. I got to figure it out. And the last couple of starts, he's just attacked the zone. He's been much more efficient. What did he throw? 75, 80 pitches yesterday to get through 7 innings.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe I'm off by a little bit, but he was cruising there.
Still likes to give up the occasional late inning home run.
Yeah, 6th inning home run, of course. Wouldn't be a Sonny Gray start without that. But he's at least back on track. But yeah, I mean, the state of this rotation is significantly less solid than it was 2 months ago. You're kind of now relying on Kenta Maeda and Dallas Keuchel, 2 35, 36-year-olds.
We went out of the way to praise Bailey Ober. I think it was the last
I'm blaming
Friday.
You on that.
Last Friday.
Because you didn't knock on wood like you usually do, John.
I absolutely knocked on wood.
No, this isn't wood. That's what we found out. This is fake wood.
Okay, all right.
Whenever you knock on it, it doesn't help. Because that's the only explanation.
You're right. That's right. Yeah. Otherwise, it'd be perfect. Yeah. Here's the thing. Just think how much worse Bailey Ober's start would have been had I not knocked on wood.
Yeah. The game would still be going.
Exactly.
They'd never gotten 27 outs.
That's right.
Or 24 outs, whatever they needed in that game. And then we mentioned this earlier, but Alex Kirilloff goes on the IL with a shoulder injury that he initially hurt a little while ago when he dove for a ball at first, I think.
Okay.
Kind of tweaked it or jammed it. Then he played through it for a while. It got better, but then it got worse and then hasn't gotten better from there. So he's shut down. I think they said he's getting a cortisone injection, which is never great, but that's part of the process to get the inflammation down and all that stuff. And also just lessen the immediate pain or discomfort. It sucks for him, first of all.
He was on fire.
Because for a guy who has had to battle back from back-to-back season-ending wrist problems that weren't just season-ending but potentially career-threatening.
Right.
The second of which they shortened a bone in his wrist. Like these are not normal baseball surgeries. He began the season on the injured list. There were all kinds of questions about it. Even when they first called him up, we were like, well, he's grounding out a lot and he's not really driving the ball that much. Then he goes through a stretch where he hits 4 homers in 6 games. And you're thinking, man, this is why we were so in love with this dude's bat for the last 5 years. Yeah. And he might be their number 3 hitter for the next decade and on and on.
Yep.
And then he goes through, I think he was like 0 for 10 with 7 strikeouts. And you go, what happened here? And it turns out he's playing through a shoulder injury.
Right,
Again, when you see these sort of completely out of line bad performances where it's, several degrees of magnitude past just a bad slump or whatever. When a guy goes, like with Buxton, we've seen it. When Buxton goes 0 for 30 with 22 strikeouts, something is wrong with
landing
him.
On his face.
Right. Something is wrong with him physically,
right,
typically. And so that's the case with Kirilloff. Obviously, the hope is that he can come back, certainly in September, let's say.
Right.
But that's no sure thing. And we talked about how Julian and Kirilloff and now Wallner have really boosted their lineup against right-handed pitchers to the point that it's been pretty damn productive.
Yeah.
I mean, they're above average.
They've been very productive since the
in
All-Star
OPS,
break.
and that's why the focus on adding right-handed bats to combat what is a league worst lineup against lefties all season became the priority. But if you take Kirilloff now out of the mix of left-handed bats, then that's looking a lot less. And I mean, you need Joey Gallo at first base, or you need Jorge Polanco to really start hitting from the left side, or Kepler to keep playing pretty well, which he has. But I don't know.
Donovan Solano to carry the day, right?
As a righty. And I mean, it's just also, he had literally just won American League Player of the Week. Not that that's like, equivalent to winning MVP or something, but like,
it is for a week.
Well, right.
Right.
But I mean, just what a crap hand he continues to be dealt over and over with multiple wrist surgeries, and he's fought back, and he's changed stylistically to become a more patient hitter, and he's finally starting to tap into a little bit more power, going to the opposite field, driving the ball. We talked to him, a week and a half ago after he won the Player of the Week, and he's like, I'm feeling pretty good. I love that I can just start to make mechanical swing adjustments and not have to worry about injury within that. And then shoulder injury, which, I don't know, it's terrible. It does mean, however, like we said, it may have saved Joey Gallo, or at least bought Joey Gallo a little bit more time.
Because what the Twins ended up doing, I think Friday, was we were talking about what move are they going to make to try and bring Polanco back to this lineup. We weren't sure what that move was going to make, and they did one that we talked about, but we weren't sure they would ever do, which was they sent down a AAA or a pitcher to AAA. Yeah, they went with a 12-man pitching staff for
the first time this year.
Yeah, right.
And then 2 days later, they activated Theo Bar and placed Kirilloff on the IL.
That's right.
That would have been the decision that would have been interesting if Kirilloff was not bound for the IL.
Right. If Theo Bar was coming back up,
then who would have gone?
And they go back to a 13-man pitching staff. What happens?
It would seemingly have to be Gallo. Instead, this saves that. It also just means there's zero reason whatsoever to send down Matt Wallner, which is a nice part of this, silver lining in this.
Yeah, I mean, it actually indicates they weren't going to send down Matt Wallner.
They weren't.
They were. I don't know exactly what move was going to be made. We were worried that might be the move that came on Friday, and
because they've made that move before, several times.
Right, yeah.
I mean, Matt Wallner can bang. Like I just. Is he going to strike out too much? Yeah, probably. Is he going to hit in the low 200s instead of 280? Yeah. Is there going to be some, I call them misadventures in fly ball pursuits? Yes. But the arm's going to make up for some balls he doesn't catch. The arm is, just off the charts, 100-mile-an-hour arm.
I have never really recognized. I mean, I know you want to have a good, a strong arm in right field. I mean, I like seeing that. Wallner's the first person that made me think, even if your range isn't very good, if you've got just a tremendous arm in right field, you're pretty good to go.
Well, right, because there's just so many, yes, if you're not catching certain balls, that's runs you're giving away.
Yeah,
but there are so many plays that involve a right fielder where even it's not something you did wrong. Someone just singles to right field, and you come in and you scoop it up, and are they going for a double?
Yeah,
with Matt Wallner there.
The guy that was on first going to third.
Exactly.
Right.
Or second to home.
Right.
There are just so many kind of inflection points that involve a right fielder, regardless of their own performance. And, we've seen it over the years with guys like Keuchel, it always starts the same, which is they test him.
Right.
And
that's right.
You throw out, we've seen this from Wallner when he was up earlier this season. He threw out two guys in the same
Blue
series.
Jays, and
I was like, I bet you they don't test him a third time, and they did not test him.
No, they did
there was
not.
one play, ball kind of into the corner, and they held up at
first base.
And it was like, there's an updating of the scouting report in real time.
That's exactly right.
That's what we saw with Keuchel, and also we saw it with Eddie Rosario in left field.
Yes, you're right.
Which is, it starts with testing the guy's arm.
That's right.
Either because you just don't know it's a good arm, or because teams just are like, I don't care if it's a good arm. Let's see how good it is. And then, you look at Keuchel's stats in right field. They're very funny. It's like first couple years, threw out 17 guys, threw out 14 guys, and then the third year, 3 assists.
Right.
It's like, boy, what, did his arm fall off? The opposite. Teams realized, what are we doing running on this guy?
Right.
Same thing with Eddie Rosario, although Eddie Rosario would kind of bait people into running on him.
That's true.
By the end, I feel like he'd be like, let me just not hustle after this, but I got it, I'm going to throw you out of the play. And so I think we're going to see that from Wallner. But just in general, I do think he's going to strike out a lot. And so the ability to get your strikeout rate to 30%, not 40%, which is like the Joey Gallo range.
Right.
Is key, because at 30%, league average is like 24% or something like that. At 30%, you're a 240 hitter, generally. At 40%, you're a 199 hitter like Joey Gallo, although he aspires to be a 199 hitter at this point. and as a 240 hitter, I love Wallner's plate approach, and we talk about this a lot. There's a tendency, or it's natural to see a guy who strikes out a lot and to assume they just swing at everything. But often, the guys with the highest strikeout rates, especially major leaguers with the highest strikeout rates, the Sano's or Adam Dunn's or guys like that, they actually are very patient. And in fact, that leads to higher strikeout rates because they're not swinging early in counts, looking to put the ball in play. I think, Eddie Rosario is an example of a guy who swings at everything. He actually didn't strike out that much because he often wasn't two strikes. Right. You can't strike out when there isn't two strikes. That's a breaking news from your friend Aaron.
Right.
And so you look at Wallner, and he's pretty discerning at the plate. Like, he doesn't swing a lot. When he does swing, he misses a lot. And so when he gets 2-2, 3-2, deep in counts, he really only has one swing to make it happen. Right. And if you're going to swing and miss a lot, you're going to lead to strikeouts. But I like his overall approach, and I do think from the 40-something games he's played so far, he's got like a 135 OPS plus. He's been great last year and this year when given a chance. I do think he's got a little bit more ability to...
He doesn't seem like an all-or-nothing guy.
Right, to get a key single and even go the other way a little bit, foul off some pitches, be a tougher out than just what we see from Gallo, which is home run or strikeout.
I kind of hate to say this, but he reminds me of Sano in 2015. Right. Sano came up. Like, Sano was, he hit home runs. He hit monstrous home runs. Yes. But he also seemed to be able to put the ball in play all over the field a fair amount.
Yes. And just the quality of Sano's at-bats, which is going to forever be lost in what ended up happening to him, and people will just look at the strikeout rates and assume he just swung at every slider ever. Right. But the first couple years of Miguel Sano, I never saw a guy take better at-bats. Now, they often ended in strikeouts, which people discount that. But we used to talk all the time about how his whole goal was to drag the pitcher out to the deep water and then just drown him and wait for a mistake or take a walk. And sometimes you strike out. And so that's the type of hitter I think Wallner trends more towards than, hopefully. I mean, Gallo was that type of hitter early in his career too. We just, unfortunately, this version of Gallo is just not as capable of doing that. So I really think, clearly Wallner has passed Larnach on the pecking order.
Oh, for sure.
Which he hadn't early in the season, but Right. And I think, to your point,
I think
he's passed Gallo, which, I would argue that Larnach should have passed Gallo at this point. And so I think that's good to see. I guess my question with Wallner is, if Kirilloff comes back, which obviously would be great, let's say 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, are they willing to, even past the trade deadline, part ways with Gallo to keep Wallner? Because you can't do both. Yeah. Just strictly from a roster standpoint, unless you go to 12 pitchers, you can't keep them. But also, where are you playing all these left-handed corner guys?
We've also got Royce Lewis potentially coming back at some point here too.
Yeah.
Like that.
Now, on September 1st, they can add 2 players.
Well, that's true.
It's not like the old days. The good old days, you could go up to 40 in September,
that's true.
And it would be crazy. You'd have guys just sitting on the bench doing nothing because the AAA season was over.
But they're not going to want to have both of those players be hitters for sure.
No, they'll for sure have a pitcher be. I'm sure they'll be 14-14 instead of 13-13, the roster split or whatever. But that would at least.
Can they do 15?
I don't think so.
You can't do 15 pitchers?
I don't think you can go past an even split anymore at any point, but I might be wrong. I know you can't go past 13 in the regular
during the regular season. You can't, right?
Not 100%. I would argue, certainly, you don't need 15 GD pitchers. Like, you don't need 14. I don't know. I'm like my grandpa now with that, but I don't think you need 13 if you manage it well. But clearly they disagree. So that's the good news in all this. Matt Wallner is beyond deserving of an opportunity. We, and certainly I, have become almost a parody of myself, banging the table for him, going back to the end of last season, all off season. When they signed Gallo, part of it was, they got Wallner, they got Larnach, they got what do they need this guy for? Turns out, unfortunately, that's right. And so I'm glad, it took long enough. Yep. And who knows how firm this opportunity is once the roster, if it gets fully healthy. But, hopefully fans can see why. This ain't a perfect player, but the things he does well can be extraordinarily valuable. And he's 25. He's minimum salaried for 3 more years. Yeah. He's from Forest Lake. He's a guy that you can build things around.
And right now,
you ain't betting nothing around
right now,
Joey
he looks
Gallo.
like the second best hitter in the lineup
and that's
right
the other thing that I think has become apparent this year, and this is something we used to write about back in the day.
Yes.
Which is there's always this perception that, well, yeah, you want to develop young players, but you can never fully trust them right away because what if they flop? Right. In reality, this happened a lot. They'd call up Morneau, they'd call up Jason Bartlett, they'd call up somebody, Mauer, whatever, and it's like, no, this guy's immediately one of their best players. Right. And we're seeing that this year. Who are their best hitters at this point? Now, Kirilov's hurt, but Julian, Kirilov, Wallner, Royce Lewis hit 325 right away. Right. Like, their best hitters are their least experienced hitters. And maybe that won't be the case over 100 games. It's only been a case over 40 games or whatever. But the idea that we can't fully trust these young guys because what if they come up and flop? You know who comes up and flops? Joey Gallo, Christian Vasquez, Carlos Correa, for that matter. Like, there's no. I think the link between experience and floor for players or flop projectability is so out the window now because I think younger players. First of all, the level of competition at AAA has blurred so much to the level of competition to the majors because half the pitchers on a AAA staff are going back and forth anyway. I mean, they're not elite major league pitchers, but you go look at the Saints staff, it's Oliver Ortega. Right. Well, he pitches for the Twins too, or it's Josh Winder, or it's Cole Sands or whatever. So anyway, I'm glad to see. It's unfortunate that it's coming in Kirilov's absence, but you can start to dream on a Twins lineup, whether it's end of this year, next year, that's got Julian and Royce Lewis and Kirilov and Wallner, and we can finish up by talking about a promotion of Brooks Lee from AA to AAA yesterday. Brooks Lee, 22 years old. He was their 8th overall pick last July, so he's been a pro for 13 months. He's already at AAA. He was very good after signing last year, made it to AA for the AA playoffs last year, which is very aggressive, a month after signing, basically. Was a star player at Cal Poly, played for his dad at Cal Poly. The Twins were thrilled to get him at number 8. He was sort of a consensus top 3 or 4 guy in the draft, but some pitchers got in the mix there, and he dropped to them. Early on this season, they signed him to AA full-time, which is really aggressive for a guy's first full season at 22. And he was good, but he wasn't like, oh, wow, look at these numbers. It was like...
He had a real hot start and then slowed down a little bit in May.
He was hitting like 275, drew some walks, a lot of doubles, not many homers. Over the last month, basically, 25 games or so, he hit like 360, 6 or 7 home runs, very low strikeout rate, a lot of walks, a lot of doubles. It was apparent he's just one of the best players in the Texas League, regardless of age. And for a 22-year-old to do that, he's really impressive. So I think this was
shortstop.
At shortstop, although he won't be a shortstop. But I think it's beyond right to move him to AAA. I think it's interesting that they announced Brooks Lee was going to AAA yesterday morning, and then a couple hours later, after the AAA team played a game without him, because he hadn't gotten there yet, they then announced 2 other prospects, Junior Severino.
Waiting for him to get promoted, too.
Yes, my friend Uncle Junior, for Sopranos fans. And then Deshaun Kersey also got promoted, but they waited because to make room for those 2, they released 2 players from the AAA roster, including Kersey's a center fielder, left-handed hitting center fielder. So they released Mark Contreras, who played yesterday morning's game in center field, and I think had a hit. So they were waiting from a roster standpoint. That's the downside to this stuff, which everyone loves. The new big thing, everyone loves to track progress of prospects. This guy's in need of a promotion, but particularly when you get to the upper rungs of the minors, promotions to AAA mean releases more so than demotions, because you're not going to send Mark Contreras to AA. Right. You're just going to let him out of his contract and
let him find someplace else to play.
He's a guy who was pushed into action in the Twins outfield last year because they were just decimated by injuries, obviously, and he didn't fare particularly well, although he had a few homers. He's just a good, solid AAA outfielder who I think in different circumstances could have carved out a niche as a 3 or 4 year fourth outfielder. He gets hot for a couple
Absolutely
months
right.
and he makes a few $1,000,000 or whatever. I mean, that's sort of how that works for guys. It's kind of a crapshoot of who gets the chance and then who
Right.
gets hot at the right time. You know, he's not done. He's going to be able to latch on. Maybe not this season. It's kind of a tough time to get
It is
released
kind of
in
a tough time,
August
yeah.
if you're a AAA player or whatever. But that was the one. He's I would describe him as a good dude. Great mustache.
Yes.
And I think he's an example of that fine line I talk about between this guy's a good AAA player and this guy could be a useful role player in the majors, but will he ever get that opportunity?
Right.
And sometimes the guy gets that opportunity and makes a career out of it, and sometimes the guy, you know, hits 150 in a month and then just gets deemed, oh, he's a AAA player for life, basically. And
I mean,
that's-
it's not uncommon that you talk to guys who topped out at AAA or never really had much
Right.
of a career. They had a couple of cups of coffee in the majors, and you talk to them about their career, and they'll point to another guy.
Right.
They'll point to a veteran, a guy who played 5-6 years in the majors as a left-handed bench a bat. Contreras has a lot of things that would be appealing. He can
Yes.
play a lot of the outfield spots. He's left-handed.
If he made a little
Right.
bit more consistent contact,
Right.
he'd be a perfect fourth outfielder.
Right.
Left-handed bat, he's got some pop. He can play all three spots. Got a good arm in the outfield.
Right.
Good
That's right.
base runner. All that stuff.
and I'm hoping he still gets that chance
Yeah, we'll
someplace. We'll see.
So yeah, Brooks Lee is now at AAA.
This organization is not where you want to be a left-handed out-hitting outfielder.
That's very true. Yeah, that is very true. Although that's what Kersey is too. So just a little, I don't know. Hopefully we've talked a lot about Brooks Lee, but Brooks Lee is. I'll give you three little mini scouting reports on these three guys, because what we always say, I say this about AAA sometimes, but it's definitely, or about AA sometimes, but it's definitely true about AAA. Once you're at AAA, now they're not on the 40-man roster. If you're at AAA and you're on the 40-man roster, you're probably going to play in the majors that season.
Yes.
If you're just at AAA, which they didn't need to be added to the 40-man roster yet in terms of Brooks Lee, but I guess I wouldn't bet on him playing for the Twins this season, just because that would be very aggressive. But it's certainly not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
You know, if Royce Lewis comes back and retweaks his oblique or something like that, and they're just saying
We need somebody at third
we
base.
need
Yep.
infield help here,
Yep.
Brooks Lee is a real possibility. I think certainly he's lined up to finish this year at AAA, do the old 3-4 weeks at AAA next year to work on these rough edges, service time, and then get a shot in May of next year. Let's say, depending on spring training goes and all that. But very promising prospect. Certainly a consensus top, probably 30 or 40 at this point, global prospect. Unlikely to stick at shortstop, although that's not necessarily what the Twins would need anyway.
Right.
But I've talked to people from the moment he was drafted who said Gold Glove potential at third base, a perfect fit at third base. Like, can play some shortstop, but he's a bigger body than most shortstops, not super fast, a little bit like Correa in that sense.
Yeah.
Good arm, but maybe not a Correa style arm. But you moved at to third base, all of a sudden the good hands are a lot more important than
Right.
the mediocre range.
Right.
Now, Royce Lewis is a young guy who's playing third base now too.
Yes.
In my mind, the perfect, or the, I guess, ideal infield alignment, let's say starting in the middle of next season going forward, is Brooks Lee at third, Correa at short, Royce Lewis at second, Kirilloff at first. I will also say that I personally believe Royce Lewis's best position would be center field, which I don't think the Twins have ruled out long term, but they've ruled out this year. I talked to Scott Boras about that in person, and he didn't really love the idea, but I don't know that the Twins will care what he thinks about it beyond this first year once they get Lewis healthy. But
and I would think, in terms of Royce Lewis's value, and value both to a team, but eventually value on free agency, it'd be a lot more valuable to be a center fielder than to be a second baseman.
Yeah, true. I mean, it just depends. Are you a good center field? But obviously now Julian is in that mix, which is partly why if you play Lewis in center, you could potentially continue to play Julian at second. Now that's its own issue.
Yes.
Doe tweeted out, got me all hot and bothered, but then kind of threw cold water on it. He said, hey, Julian's working out at first base here on the road in St. Louis. And I thought, hey, have we kind of willed this into existence by saying, why don't they? And then he talked to Julian afterward, and Julian was like, I just was messing around taking some balls at first base.
We'll see.
But I do think that would certainly help them without Kirilloff in the picture. If you could play Julian at first 3 times a week against righties,
Yeah.
play Polanco back at second, especially once Royce Lewis is back, then that would solve that logjam a little bit, but we'll see. The scouting report, and so Brooks Lee, what type of player does he project to be? I think he projects to be a very good defensive third baseman who could also play second, could also play some short, certainly. He's a switch hitter. He's shown incredible doubles power, gap-to-gap kind of doubles power going back to college in the minors. He's recently been adding – it's funny, like he only had like 5 home runs in the first half, but they were all just monster home runs. Right. And so people would watch him and go, he's not doing it often, but when he hits it, it stays hit.
You can see what can happen.
And so now we're starting to see he's up to like, I don't know, 12 homers 11 on the season or something like that. So, I think realistically, and controls the strike zone very well from both sides of the plate, makes a lot of good contact, line drive approach, doesn't strike out much, but also draws a lot of walks for a guy who's not a big slugger. Yeah. And so not going to be a speed guy, but I think projects as, maybe a 285 hitter with 30 or 40 doubles, 15, 20 homers, good defense, a lot of walks, low-ish strikeout rate. That's a, ideal, let's say, number 2, number 3 type of hitter in a good lineup.
Listen, we've been talking about the fact that he's a shortstop, but the reason they were so excited to get him where they got him in the draft is because of his bat.
Right.
Like he was one of the best pure hitters
he hit
in the draft.
Huge numbers at Cal Poly 2 years in a row. Player of the year in the conference, which I know Cal Poly people are like, what is that? But they play in the same conference as like Cal State football. I mean, baseball powerhouses are different than other sports. Right. Like it's not Alabama is not a baseball powerhouse. It's all these Cal schools.
He's got other things going for him than the bat. Like he's a good good fielder and he's a smart guy and he's a coach's son and all this other stuff. But it was the bat that made him, perceived to be a top 5 pick that ended up falling.
And the bat looks every bit as legit as they had hoped.
Yeah.
Quick scouting reports on the other 2 that they promoted.
Okay.
Kersey has become a favorite of mine. He's 26, and he was drafted like way back in I think 2018 or something like that as a speed and defense left-handed hitting center fielder, but he just didn't really hit. Okay. And so you were like, is this guy even a 4th outfielder? Like he's got wheels and he's a good defender and he steals bases and all that. This year, finally, he showed some signs last year, I would say, but then this year at AA, hitting near 300. A lot more power than he's ever shown before. Still, not a great strikeout to walk ratio or anything. He's a free swinger. Tons of stolen bases. To me, he's at the very least an ideal 4th outfielder. Like we talked about Contreras.
Sure.
It's a Contreras skill set, but much better.
Right.
Like much more speed, a lot more contact. He's a legit, center fielder in the majors. I like him a lot. I thought he was underrated. I'm glad to see him getting a bump up to AAA, especially he's 26. They're going to have to make a decision in terms of the 40-man roster with him and Severino, who I'm going to talk about in a second. So, I like Kersey, and certainly there's a need in center field. I'm not saying right now, but next year and beyond. If they believe in Kersey, and at least they believe he's a legit center fielder defensively, whatever he can, and he can run – whatever he can give you offensively as, the strong side of the left-handed side of a platoon, let's say, I think could be a really nice role player for them. Cheap, fill the role. At worst, he's a backup. So I hope he does well enough here down the stretch at AAA that adding him to the 40-man roster and protecting him from the Rule 5 draft becomes sort of a no-brainer. Because, he's a marginal guy in that sense at 26.
Somebody that Nick Gordon should be worried about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where a role would be for Nick Gordon at this point,
right?
Even if he does come back. But yeah,
for next
stylistically,
year,
he's similar to Nick Gordon. Mm-hmm. I hate to say this, but I think Nick Gordon's maybe he comes back, gets a few games in this year. I mean, he's coming back from a fractured fibula. Right, yeah. That's a significant injury. But he's walking around. He's doing better. I don't know where he would fit beyond this season, and he's out of options, obviously. So, Junior Severino. Is a guy they've left unprotected from the Rule 5 draft the last 2 off seasons, and he's gone unpicked, having kind of a breakout year at AA, and he's still 23, 24. He can hit for power. He's a switch hitter, hits for power from both sides of the plate. He's got, 25 homers already this year. Huge power numbers, slugging like almost 600 in the Texas League. The question for him is twofold. One, is he going to make any contact whatsoever? Big strikeout rate. And it's gotten worse as he's gone up in the minors. He draws a fair amount of walks, but I think some of that's because of the power, that they're just scared of him. is he going to, we talked about it with Wallner, can he be a 30% strikeout guy, not a 35, 40% strikeout guy? And then the bigger picture question with him, as we just talk every year about these bats that the Twins have who are moving down the defensive spectrum, at some point we're talking about with Wallner, with Julian, with Larnach, all this, with Arise, you can't just have 9 DHs. Right. And he's sort of trending in that direction. He plays third base and second base. I think he's fringy, passable at both, maybe, but he's not a guy who you're going to want to play at either spot. Now, if he's hitting 25 homers a year, similar to Julian at second base, there are offensive levels that make you willing to play a guy at defensively who isn't there. But I think realistically, Severino's a first base DH type who can play a little bit of the 2 infield spots, which is it's tough. It's tough to crack out lineup.
It'll be interesting to see where they play him at AAA, because in AA, they were moving him around quite a bit.
Right.
Like I think over half of his starts were at third base, but a quarter of those starts were at second base, a quarter of those starts in left field, and it's not unusual for the Twins to do that when they're not really sure what they're going to do with the guy. Right? Let's play him all around and see what happens. That also. That there is also sort of that's interesting as sort of a utility player bench bat, like a guy that
for sure I could definitely see that type of role.
He's a guy that you bring in, like we need to add some power right here in the late innings, and he's not going to kill us too much at second base or third base, although that
stylistically
doesn't seem very Baldelli-ish to do that, but
true. Like stylistically, they're extremely different. But it could almost be like a Solano type of role.
Yes,
which is like he's mostly a first baseman. He can pinch hit. He can DH. He can play some second. He can play some third if you need him to. Obviously the bat's going to carry him. But he's another guy. He's either going to be added to the 40-man roster this offseason, as soon as the season's over, or he's going to be eligible again for the Rule 5. Now, he's been passed over in the Rule 5 before, but, he's going to have put up monster numbers at AA and potentially good numbers at AAA to end of the season. So, and then the last minor league note that was fun yesterday is Walker Jenkins made his professional debut as expected in the Florida Complex League, which is at the spring training site of the Twins. That's where they play their home games, at one of the backfields, basically. It's the lowest level of professional baseball in the United States for affiliated teams. The lower level is like the Dominican Summer League, which is like when you sign a guy at 16, you send him to that. Then a year later, you bring him over to America to play in the Florida Complex League. He hit a double in his first at bat. I think they said on the first pitch he saw.
All right.
Now, I then saw that double.
It was down the line.
It was a squib down the line. Whatever.
He waited on it.
Yeah. In my head, I'm picturing he banged it off the right center field wall or something like that. And then he got a single later and he stole a base. So 2 hits and a steal in his debut. He was the DH there. He part of the beauty of MLB putting in place this much shorter timeline for draft picks to sign. It used to drag out into August. You basically have 3 weeks after the draft to sign, and we saw Walker Jenkins was the last guy to sign, and yet it's first week of August, and he's playing professionally now. It gives you at minimum a month to kind of get your feet wet, and like I said, show you're not a lemon.
Right. Yes,
it's not going to take many more games like yesterday's where you can at least say the guy's not a lemon. He might not be a great player, we'll see, but 10 games in for Keanu Cavaco,
it was like, story.
We might have a lemon here. So that's fun. I think, what's a realistic timeline for him in terms of, he's going to, I would guess, no matter how well he does in rookie ball, he's going to stay in rookie ball. I think they could.
This is not a Brooks Lee situation where he's a polished 22-year-old, 21-year-old thing. This is a 18-year-old now, but
freshly
18. Yeah.
It's possible next year at what would be his age 19 season, that they would put him at low A, which is Fort Myers. But that's awfully aggressive for a high school draft pick. I think more likely would be he kind of does extended spring training for a little bit, plays again in the Florida Complex League, then goes, month or two in like to join Fort Myers. From there, they're not going to be aggressive with him. Like, the goal is not to get him to the majors at 20, but you can kind of choose your own adventure at that point. If he goes to the to low A and he just knocks the F out of pitchers, you're not going to keep him at low A for that long.
If he doesn't,
well, right.
then maybe he stays a little more time at low A.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess a good outcome for him in terms of progressing to the majors would be to get there at, I don't know, 22, let's say, which is roughly where Brooksley is right now on the verge of that. And that's once in a while you see a Bryce Harper or Juan Soto make it at 19, 20 or whatever, but that's not really the goal or the path that they put out. Okay, that's probably enough. Anything else we didn't cover? Let's see. I'm looking just to check my notes. I was on a show with AJ Pierzynski, Adam Jones, the old Orioles center fielder, and Todd Frazier, the third baseman who a bunch of teams, talking about the Twins deadline. And I was talking to Pierzynski. You can watch, it's a YouTube show. It's called Foul Territory that they've I don't know. It's a little bit like the Pat McAfee football show.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
Yeah,
and it's a little bit like maybe John Boy with Plouffe and everything, where it's like just a bunch of former players getting around. They get I was going to say good guests, but I was in the mix. So. But they get big name guests other than me, and they get a lot. Like Max Muncy was the guest before me. Okay. And then it was like, thanks, Max. Next up, Aaron Gleeman. And it's like, boy, that's a drop off. But a couple things, they were, I would say, similarly confused about the Twins' lack of movement. That's why they had me on to talk about that. Yeah. And obviously, AJ, I'm not saying he's close to the Twins, but he's got some insight into the Twins. Yeah. He's been here a couple times this season to broadcast their games. I talked to him in the clubhouse maybe a month ago or something. So he definitely has connections with the Twins, and he was talking about a lot of the same stuff we were, and they were saying, I think Todd Frazier was like, they could have just, I wanted to be like, they could have used you. Just a right-handed.
Yeah, exactly right.
Or honestly, prime Adam Jones would have been whatever. But the other funny thing that AJ, I have not heard the show much, so I don't know. Like, sometimes we'll have a guest on, and they don't know like our dumb jokes. They don't know we've been obsessively talking about Matt Wallner for whatever. Yeah, so Doe's like, I think they should get Matt Wallner a shot. And it's like, buddy. And so Pierzynski was like, what is your take at this point on the Arise for Lopez trade? And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And he goes, do you still think it was a reasonable trade? And I said, look, I do think it was a reasonable trade. I think time will show that it was a reasonable trade for both sides. But right now, if you trade away a guy and he's hitting 380, you've made a bad trade in the moment. And so I'm expecting them to be like, yeah, that was a mistake trading away a Rise. Because any sort of cliched fan is like, how could they trade? And Pierzynski goes, oh, I disagree. You need the pitching. And I'm like, oh, wait, we took a completely different stance on this. And then the other funny thing that he said, they were joking with him about being an ex-Twin and everything. And I said, how does it feel to forever be the greatest trade in the history of the Minnesota Twins, sending you to San Francisco?
Right.
And he was like, oh, you really think so? And I said, they might build a statue for you outside Target Field. And then I said, at the very least, if they ever retire Joe Nathan's number, there should be a little like something stapled to it that's just a picture of AJ Pierzynski giving a thumbs up, and they were laughing at that. And I realized, okay, that's the way to get to these guys' hearts, is just make fun of AJ Pierzynski. That was. I rarely go on camera, as you know.
Yeah,
and I had a nice.
So this was on camera.
Yeah, this was on. camera.
I didn't catch that.
I had a nice big old pimple on my forehead,
That's good.
which it looks like I had a dented forehead on the camera. But I made an exception in this case because I thought, how often are 3 former All-Stars with $200 million in career earnings going to invite you on to give your opinions about their sport? I wanted to say that. I was like, what do you need me here for?
Right,
like,
exactly.
So anyway, it's called the Foul Territory. I linked to it on Twitter or whatever. And I think, let's see, we didn't even talk about Buxton's hamstring injury.
I know.
Which apparently these hamstring injuries are going around. But that's another thing by roster-wise.
It's a side effect of pink eye.
Yeah. Weakened hamstring. That could very well lead to an IL stint, certainly.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, he's missed now 2 games, obviously. Yep. And all of the kind of what happens when. I mean, look at this.
They don't have an off day for a while.
Think of how we always preach this, but it's impossible to remember in the moment of this stuff will work itself out before you actually have to make a decision. And think how funny it is in this Keuchel situation, which is they literally had 48 hours after the point at which he opted out. And at like hour 40, they were like, Joe Ryan's got an injury, he's going on the IL.
Yeah.
And, we talk about what's going to happen with Gallo. Is he going to get DFA'd? No, actually, Kirilloff's going to go on the IL about 5 minutes before they would have had to DFA Gallo, and on and on and on. And as we're talking about, well, what happens when Royce Lewis is ready, or what happens when this guy's ready? It's like, well, what if Buxton just goes back on the IL or something? So it's unfortunate because he's been ripping double since he came back.
Yeah.
Like he's actually had better at bats. He had a couple of hits against lefties.
Ever since coming back from paternity leave.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Which was 72 hours or whatever.
Right.
Okay. We will be back Monday for the Patreon crowd.
Yep. Arizona Diamondbacks.
Yes.
Series, which tough team.
Hopefully,
and meanwhile, Cleveland's facing the White Sox, which
not a tough team.
No,
I don't even know who's in the White Sox bullpen at this point.
Right.
We'll be back Monday. Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman to join us. Join us down the stretch.
Join us for the pennant race.
If you join us today and you stick with us through the Twins World Series run, it'll probably cost you like $10.
Also, you can go back and listen to the rant that we did on Tuesday night.
True.
As we
the archives are totally free.
Once you sign up, you don't actually have to pay anything until we publish a new episode.
Right. It's $1
All the
for
old
new
stuff
episodes.
you get. Yeah.
So go listen to
that's right.
various rants.
Thanks to our advertisers, RotoWire. Good to have you guys back. Soda Stick, BetterHelp, and Game Time will be back on Monday for the Patreon crowd. My guess is Wednesday we're probably doing a mailbag to maybe the final touch on the trade deadline therapy sessions that we're doing, and then otherwise we'll be talking to you next Friday. I will be in Philadelphia after watching 2 games in Detroit and getting ready for a Phillies game. So that'll be a Zoom podcast. We'll talk to you guys then.